What is up, guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here. In today's video, we are going to be talking about Kaiba's signature monster, the virtually invincible powerful engine of destruction, the Blue Eyes White Dragon. So way back in the day, no one really used Blue Eyes in a competitive sense. Even though on the TV show you could summon it really easily, 2 tributes is just a bit too much to invest into a monster with no effect. However, in Shining Victories, the Blue Eyes Structure Deck, the movie pack, and then Legendary Duelists, over time we've actually gotten a bunch of Blue Eyes support that has allowed the deck to become a decent contender in the metagame. The deck's performance actually peaked with its World Championship win in 2016, although that win was with the World's ban list rather than the TCG ban list. And now Master Rule 4 has had kind of mixed consequences for Blue Eyes decks. On one hand, the deck isn't necessarily dependent on putting out a ton of extra deck monsters. Going second, the deck can very easily OTK with minimal extra deck investment. But on the other hand, the game has sped up a lot with Master Rule 4, and Blue Eyes, despite being a very fast deck with a lot of discards and draw power, can struggle at times to keep up with other meta decks. Not only this, but the prevalence of hand traps in the current meta mean that Blue Eyes can struggle to get it going at all. So what we are going to do in this video is take a look at the Blue Eyes archetype, analyze the cards from both the archetype as well as the cards that are commonly used as support, and try to determine the best ways in which we could design a link monster that would help the Blue Eyes deck to compete in today's meta. Let's get started. Alright, so the Blue Eyes White Dragon monsters can be split up into 3 main kind of like categories here. We have the dragons, the spellcasters, and the eggs. Obviously, first we have the Blue Eyes White Dragon itself, which is a very key card in the deck that a lot of other different cards can interact with. Despite being a vanilla, it is something that we are going to have to run in 3s. This isn't something that we're going to be tribute summoning, but there are a lot of different ways to put it out onto the board, and it is a huge 3000 attack point body. Next up, we have Blue Eyes Alternative White Dragon, which is kind of the card that really put Blue Eyes on the map. All you have to do is reveal a vanilla Blue Eyes White Dragon in your hand to special summon this card for free, and instead of attacking, you can have this card pop a monster on your opponent's side of the field for free. This is great because it allows you to get rid of your opponent's monsters on their side of the field without having to enter the battle phase. So you can Synchro or Xyz or Link summon with it instead, and then proceed to your battle phase from there. Also, somewhat important to note is that it is treated as Blue Eyes White Dragon while it's on the field or in your graveyard. And the last main dragon we have is Dragon Spirit of White. This is another level 8, but only with 2500 attack points. When it is summoned, it lets you banish a spell or trap your opponent controls. This one isn't as useful. It doesn't like put itself onto the board, so you have to use other means to get it out. And it's typically a 1 or 2 of. You can also tribute it to special summon a Blue Eyes White Dragon from your hand, which can be situationally useful if you need to put that extra bit of damage on board, or maybe you need to get it into the graveyard. This card also is treated as a vanilla monster while it's in the hand or graveyard, so if you dump it with Dragon Shrine, you do get to dump another dragon monster as well. These dragons are going to be the main ones that we're going to use, and they're pretty great. Like, functionally, they're pretty interchangeable. We can use them to make like those level 9 synchros or those rank 8 monsters, or we're going to link with them primarily. There are a couple of other big dragons, right? We have cards like Blue Eyes Shining Dragon, or Chaos Max variants, or we have Blue Eyes Solid Dragon. But here we're just going to be looking primarily at these 3. Next, let's take a look at the Spellcasters. So these are all level 1 light tuner monsters, although whereas the rest of the deck is dragons, these are Spellcasters. Typically, these are the main cards that we want to use our normal summon on. Each of them has their own effect that lets you search, summon, or recycle other cards. So Maiden was used when it first came out, but it is largely outclassed now because it is too slow, I think. It can be used very situationally to deter your opponent from attacking because it does bring out a Blue Eyes for free. Sage with Eyes of Blue is definitely the best one here, and it is something that you're probably going to want to run 3 copies of. It can search for a level 1 light tuner monster when it's normal summoned. Typically, you're going to be wanting to search for one of the stones because you can pitch the stones as cost for other card effects. But also, it lets you search for Effect Veiler, which is kind of cool if you already have that piece in your hand. Alternatively, if you've already used your normal summon this turn, you can pitch it from your hand to send one of your effect monsters on the field to the graveyard, and then special summon a Blue Eyes from your deck. So in theory, this card is always going to provide value and is a really strong card to use. Master is another spellcaster, but it's a little bit more situational. It's kind of like Sage, but it adds a card from your graveyard instead of your deck. It can also summon a Blue Eyes monster directly from your deck, but rather than discarding it, you have to shuffle it from your graveyard back into the deck. This card was actually used by Shunsuke at Worlds in 2016, but outside of there, it hasn't really seen too much play. These cards are overall pretty underused. Like, the deck's primary focus is on summoning dragons, so these cards do get overlooked a lot. However, I do believe that these cards are pretty cool. You get a lot more value out of summoning and then synchroing with these than you do with the eggs, since the eggs are often better used as discard fodder anyways. We'll talk a little bit more about the spellcasters later on. Alright, and finally, we have the eggs here. We have just 2 of them. These are also level 1 light tuner monsters, although they are dragons, searchable with Sage with Eyes of Blue. They provide support for the archetype by bringing dragons out of the deck. So Whitestone of Legend lets you add a Blue Eyes from your deck to your hand, while the Whitestone of Ancients lets you summon one from your deck during the end phase. The Whitestone of Ancient does have another effect where you can banish it to add a Blue Eyes monster from your graveyard to your hand, but if you use that effect, you don't get to summon the monster from your deck during the end phase, so be careful and you have to consider which effect it is that you want to use. These 2 cards are very, very important in Blue Eyes. First of all, they allow you to run cards of consonance, so between that and trade-in, the deck does have a lot of draw power. Also, there's no restriction as to like how this card needs to be sent to the graveyard in order to get these effects. They get their effects either way. You can get the effect if it's discarded from your hand as cost, or if it's sent from the field to the graveyard as a result of battle, or if you synchro summon with it, which is really cool because it makes the cards a lot more versatile. Personally, I believe that the best value from these cards comes from when you discard them with either Cards of Consonance or Melody of Awakening Dragon, and can use your normal summon on something else to get like a different effect and more value from them. So the Blue Eyes archetype actually does get 2 synchro monsters. Both of them are level 9 synchros, so typically being made with 1 dragon and either an egg or a spellcaster. The first one isn't actually like a Blue Eyes card, it's called Azure Eyes Silver Dragon. This card has an effect that activates the turn it is special summoned, preventing your dragons from being targeted or destroyed by card effects, which is pretty cool. Also, you can special summon a normal monster, so either a vanilla Blue Eyes or a Dragon Spirit of White, from your graveyard during your own standby phase, which means either this card has survived your opponent's turn, or you summoned it using the next card, which is Blue Eyes Spirit Dragon, during your opponent's turn. Now, in my opinion, Blue Eyes Spirit Dragon, this card has some of the nicest artwork in the game. The secret rare looks absolutely beautiful. Anyways, this card is one of the most versatile in the deck. So this card works as one kind of a floodgate because it stops players from special summoning 2 or more monsters at a time, which is a hard stop against any pendulum decks. It can also stop cards like Cyframe Gear Gamma, because that card special summons itself and Driver out at the same time, so that's a pretty cool interaction there. It has a second effect that lets you negate a card effect that activates in the graveyard. The big part here though is that you can tribute it to special summon a light dragon synchro monster from your extra deck. This is pretty cool because you can go into a different card depending on the matchup. Typically, you're going to go into cards like Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon or Black Rose Moonlight Dragon, depending on the matchup. Alternatively, you can go into something like Azure Eyes Silver Dragon, whose effect stops it from being destroyed by Silver Dragon's effect during the end phase, and would essentially guarantee that you get an extra body on board during your upcoming standby phase. Okay, so last up we have a few different Blue Eyes themed spells and traps. There are actually quite a few different ones, but none of them are really that useful. The 3 that I'm showing here are probably the most usable of the 3 because they help support the key idea of the deck, which is pushing for damage with big dragons. One of the big problems is that you typically have to hard draw into these cards, making them inconsistent a lot of the time. Bingo Machine Go kind of attempts to fix that, letting you pick 3 Blue Eyes monsters or spells or traps that have Blue Eyes White Dragon listed in their text, then add a random one of those 3 cards to your hand. I guess it's an interesting way to search here, but not really something I'm gonna want to rely on to unbrick my hand. Rage with Eyes of Blue, I guess, is like a cute card, but you essentially have to banish every card in your possession to summon 3 vanilla monsters from your deck, not even from your graveyard. You are betting everything on the fact that you can OTK your opponent right there, so if you get disrupted, you're in for a really bad time, so again, not something I really want to depend on. The ultimate creature of destruction acts kind of as like a forbidden lance, making your dragon unaffected by card effects and can't be destroyed by battle. It's cool, but it's not really the type of card that we're looking for here. Overall, like, the spell and trap support for Blue Eyes is pretty lackluster. There are a lot of spells and traps that don't belong specifically to the archetype that help fulfill the deck strategies a lot better. Speaking of which, one of the things that the deck does want to do is turbo. We want to get through the deck as fast as possible. We want to load up the graveyard and add the right cards to our hand, then revive as many big dragons as possible to set up huge, scary boards and OTKs. So draw and search power is a huge strength of the deck. We have Sage that can search for the eggs, and Melody which can search for the dragons, and then we can pitch the eggs and the dragons with Cards of Consonance and Trade-in respectively. So between Cards of Consonance, Trade-in, and Melody of Awakening Dragon, that's 9 cards in the deck that let us dig 2 cards deeper. And oftentimes it's more because we are able to pitch something that's going to let us fetch an additional card. This draw power is super important because it lets us fill up the graveyard and draw into those really important revival cards in order to set up the boards. It also allows us to hard draw into whatever other support we're using in the deck. However, it is very important to note that these cards are very susceptible to something like Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring or Droll and Lockbird. If your opponent has these cards and uses them at just the right time, it can essentially leave you with your hand bricked and your turn over. Because of this, I would absolutely recommend playing something like 3 copies of Called by the Grave in order to really help ensure that these cards are able to resolve effectively. Alright, and then the other half of what we want to do is to revive our dragons from the graveyard after we've turboed our way through the deck. Unfortunately, now Soul Charge is banned, but there are many other options. We have Return of the Dragon Lords and Silver's Cry to revive big dragons, and then we also have access to cards like World Legacy Guard Dragon and Monster Reborn, which means the deck definitely still isn't short on options or anything. Ideally, we want to be able to summon enough big bodies on board to either set up a board full of negates and disruptions with cards like Hot Red Dragon Archfiend and number 38, or we want a board with a ton of damage to OTK your opponent with, where we can go into the extra deck if we want, but we can also use just Blue Eyes White Dragons because they are all 3k bodies and we can put damage pretty easily onto the board. Also important to note again here is that the deck is dependent on being able to summon these monsters from the graveyard, right? We don't really have a way to summon cards like this from the hand, which means that it can be screwed over by cards like DD Crow or Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion. So that being said, Crow, Ghost Bell, Ash Blossom, Droll, and Lockbird, this deck is extremely vulnerable to hand traps. They're a really big problem for this deck. So I think that is something that would need to be addressed when we're designing a Link monster. Some way to deal with hand traps is going to be very, very important. Also, in order for this deck to be successful, we are going to probably need to find ways to deal with these hand traps. So in addition to Called by the Grave, we'd probably benefit a lot from playing something like Ciphering Gear Gamma or Crossout Designator when it does come to the TCG. Okay, so one of the strengths of the deck is that it has access to a lot of different, really powerful extra deck monsters that can all be useful depending on the situation. Since Blue Eyes and Blue Eyes Alternative White Dragon are level 8s, it's very easy to make rank 8 monsters. Before it got banned, this meant that you were able to use Dark Matter Dragon relatively easily. However, even with that ban, there are still a lot of different options. You can go into cards like number 90 or number 38 in order to set up negations if you're going first. You can go into Galaxy Eyes Full Armor Photon Dragon or Alsai the Sylvan High Arbiter for spot removal, or you can go into something like Hieratic Sun Dragon Overlord of Heliopolis or number 107 to just push for damage and go for game. Also, the deck does have a number of different synchro options. It is able to make level 9 synchros with Blue Eyes and a tuner, so typically Blue Eyes Spirit Dragon or Azure Eyes, or you are able to summon through that other dragons from the extra deck with the effect of Blue Eyes Spirit Dragon. Another thing I do want to point out is that the deck can make use of something like Five-Headed Dragon and Super Polymerization to clear your opponent's entire board. Like, for example, you can stop them in the middle of setting up their Guard Dragon combo. I don't know how likely this is because it does require 5 dragons in order to make, but if you have like 1 or 2 dragons on board, it can be situationally very strong to play against Guard Dragon decks, so maybe something that you guys would want to keep in mind. Alright, and finally, a few different cards here that have or could see play in Blue Eyes decks. Now, there aren't very many options because the deck does require very specific things to be drawn together in order to be successful. For example, if you draw Trade-In, but no level 8 monster to pitch, Trade-In is a dead card and you can't get your strategy going. Or if you draw Blue Eyes Alternative White Dragon with no way to access a vanilla Blue Eyes, then you can't put the alternative dragon onto the board. Because of these restrictions, you want to avoid splashing too many different cards into Blue Eyes decks. Now, one card that fits pretty seamlessly in is Chaos Dragon Levianeer, which is searchable via Melody of Awakening Dragon. It's pretty easy to summon because you just banish 3 monsters from your graveyard. However, it is important to note that because you're probably only banishing lights, you don't get to rip a card from your opponent's hand because that does require you to banish 3 dark monsters. Rather, by banishing 3 light monsters, you get to special summon a monster from your graveyard instead, which is still pretty cool because it allows you to further extend your plays, giving you access to a free rank 8 or level 9 Synchro or a Link play, something like that. Now, Galaxy Soldier is another card that has been used in Blue Eyes White Dragon decks in the past as just a standalone 3-of. It gives the deck the ability to make Cyber Dragon Infinity going first, which is a very, very strong negate since you just need to pitch light monsters from your hand to put them onto the board. Now, this can help you to unbrick your hand as well, since it potentially does give you a way to discard the stones and proc their effects. And finally, we have the Guard Dragon package, which seems to be played in absolutely everything nowadays. However, because this is a dragon deck, it really does just make a lot of sense. You're probably still going to want to play something like Red Eyes Darkness Metal Dragon because you can bring it out for free with the Guard Dragon engine and it helps you to put additional bodies onto the board. Also, Agripane is still like a really strong card. It's pretty ridiculous because it can help put out Hot Red Dragon Archfiend or Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon out onto the board for free. Really, this engine is just so overused, it doesn't really demand much of an explanation. Alright, so let's take a look at how I think a Blue Eyes Link monster would look. Actually, what I did is I made 2 Link monsters, so one being a dragon and one being a spellcaster. I think that the spellcasters with Eyes of Blue are a severely underappreciated component of the archetype, and something that I wanted to draw more attention to. So Lord with Eyes of Blue would be a Link 1 light spellcaster monster with only 1 arrow pointing straight down that requires a level 1 spellcaster monster to make. The Lord with Eyes of Blue is kind of like a play of like Lord of D, but yeah, so obviously this is pretty specifically geared towards being summoned with any of the Blue Eyes spellcaster monsters. In doing so, I want to encourage decks to utilize the spellcaster monsters from this archetype. I kind of combined the effects of Sage and Master here, so when the card is Link summoned, you get to take a level 1 light tuner monster from your deck or graveyard and add it to your hand. I think that this card makes it pretty versatile because it can help the deck to get an additional resource from the deck early in the game, or it can recycle a resource late in the game. Also, it can theoretically get back the monster that you just Link summoned it with, setting up a potential play for next turn. I gave it another effect that lets you summon a level 8 dragon monster from your graveyard with its effect negated when Lord with Eyes of Blue is sent from the field to the graveyard. So it gets this effect if Lord with Eyes of Blue is destroyed by battle or card effect, or if you Link climb with it. The card itself is only a Link 1, so it's not letting you skip over a massive number of steps in the Link ladder or anything. But in designing this card, what I wanted to do is help encourage the use of the spellcasters in the archetype without taking away from the deck's ability to get dragons onto the board. Alright, and then we have the dragon itself. So I wanted this card to kind of be like a Link version of Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. So it is a Link 3 monster that requires 3 dragons, including at least one of them to be a Blue Eyes White Dragon. This card is a 4000 attack point light dragon monster with arrows pointing up and then bottom left and bottom right. I wanted something that would directly allow the archetype to deal with hand traps. So much like how Spirit Dragon can negate a graveyard effect, I gave this card the ability to once per turn during either player's turn, when an effect is activated in your opponent's hand, you can negate the activation of the card, and if you do, destroy it. I think that this effect is very, very necessary to help combat the deck's weakness to hand traps. Next, I put that the dragon type monsters that this card points to cannot be destroyed by battle, and they cannot be destroyed or targeted by your opponent's card effects. I considered making this a blanket effect for the entire field, but what I wanted to avoid was this card being abused by guard dragons in decks outside of Blue Eyes, so the restriction of only being dragons that this card points to seemed kind of necessary. However, I think that this effect would be very useful in helping to ensure that a guard dragon or a chaos dragon Levianeer is able to get its effect off successfully. Really, the effect is twofold, right? So one, it can help to protect a board that is already established, or two, it can be made early to help facilitate setting up the board without being disrupted. And finally, I put that when your opponent uses a card effect to send this card to the graveyard, you get to add 3 Blue Eyes White Dragons from your graveyard to your hand. At first, this seems really powerful in that you can also grab Blue Eyes Alternative White Dragon as well. However, I was kind of thinking about it and it doesn't honestly feel too broken. You only get to summon Blue Eyes Alternative White Dragon once per turn anyways, so really what you're giving the deck is additional cards to discard as fodder for other cards. Anyways, I think that this Blue Eyes Link monster that I've created here would definitely help the deck a lot and go a long way in helping the deck to see a little bit more success in the Master Rule 4 era. Okay guys, that is it for today's video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I actually had a lot of fun making it. It was something that a lot of people were asking me to make after the Magispector video, because I guess Blue Eyes is an extremely popular archetype and it's a very iconic card, so that kind of made sense. I don't know how likely it is that Blue Eyes is going to get a Link monster, let alone 2, but I can certainly hope so. Personally, I would love to see Blue Eyes do really well as a deck. I feel like the deck never really got a chance to thrive in the TCG the way that it should have. Anyways guys, be sure to smash that thumbs up button if you like this video. Be sure to comment down below about how you guys think a Blue Eyes Link monster would look, or let me know what type of effects you would give it to make it a little bit stronger that might be different from what I've presented here. Also, be sure to let me know what other archetypes you would like to see me have a similar type of discussion for in the future. I'm really excited for Link VRAINS Pack 3 to see what archetypes are going to be getting more support, and it's been a lot of fun to speculate about these new Link monsters. So yeah, also be sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss that video, as well as the many other videos that Tombox and I will be bringing to you on a regular basis. So yeah, until next time, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.